Freddy Goes to Florida, and this is chapter 6. So, for 2 weeks, the animals traveled on toward Florida. "It must be a long way," said Hank. "The weather doesn't seem to get any warmer." "But it doesn't get any colder either," said Mrs. Wiggins. "And down here the leaves are still on the trees. When we left home, the leaves around the farm had all shed, trees around the farm had all shed their leaves and were ready for winter." "Well, I don't care how far it is," says Hank. "We're certainly having a good time. I shall be almost sorry when we get there." Nearly every day now, large flocks of birds passed by them overhead, southward bound. And one morning the same swallow who had first put the idea of migrating into Charles's head dropped down from the sky and circled about over them. She had left home 2 days earlier, and she gave them all the news of the farm and the messages from their relatives, and told them that Mr. and Mrs. Bean were well, but that they felt very bad that the animals had left them. "At first," she said, "Mr. Bean thought someone had stolen you, but then somehow he guessed that you had decided to go to Florida for the winter. I heard him tell Mrs. Bean that he hoped you'd have a good time and come back safe and sound in the spring. And he said that he was going to try to make things more comfortable for you, although he didn't know how he'd manage it because he didn't have enough money to fix things up the way they ought to be." When the animals heard this, they felt a little sorry that they had left Mr. Bean without saying goodbye. "But we'll bring him something nice from Florida when we go back," they said. So far they had kept away from the cities as much as possible because they were afraid that the people would not understand that they were migrating, and they would try to lock them up and keep them. And when they had to go through villages, they always waited until late at night when everyone was asleep. But at last one day, away off in the distance, they saw a little speck of gold that glittered and sparkled in the bright sunlight. They wondered and wondered what the gold thing might be, but none of them knew, and pretty soon, as they went along, the road turned into a street, and there were houses on both sides of it, and trolley tracks down the middle, and the speck of gold grew bigger and bigger. It looked as if the great golden balloon was tethered among the trees ahead of them. "We're coming to a city," said Robert. "We'd better turn off this road and go around it." "I wish I knew what that gold thing was," said Freddy the pig. Freddy was a very inquiring mind. Just then a little woolly white dog with a very fancy blue ribbon around his neck came along, and Freddy asked him. The little dog stuck his nose up in the air. "Don't speak to me, you common pig," he said. "Eh?" said Freddy. "What's the matter with you? I only asked a civil question." "Go away, you vulgar creature," said the little dog snippily. "Oh," said Freddy, "you're too stuck up to talk to a pig, are you?" And he laughed and ran at the little dog and rolled him over and over in the road until his white coat and his blue ribbon were both gray with dust. And then he stood him on his feet now and said, "Now, answer my question." Then the little dog meekly told him that the thing that looked like a golden balloon was the dome of the Capitol, and that the city they were coming to was Washington, where the president lives. And when Freddy had given him a lecture on politeness and had helped him to brush the dust off himself, he let him go. "I'd like to see the president," said Hank. All the others said that they would too, but they were afraid to go into the city because the people might lock them up, and the boys were sure to throw stones at them. But Jinx, the cat, said, "I vote we go, just the same. I don't believe the president will let them do anything to us, and we can see the Capitol and the Washington Monument and maybe go up to the White House and call on the president." So they decided to go and started down the street toward the city. All of the people came out on their doorsteps and watched them go by, but nobody bothered them, and by they came to the Capitol. They stood for a long time and admired the big white building with its many columns and its gilded dome, and then they walked around to the side and admired it some more. And while they were standing there, 2 senators in silk hats came out and saw them. "I didn't know that animals ever visited the Capitol," said the first senator. "Well, neither did I," said the second senator, "but I don't see why they shouldn't. I think it's rather nice." Then a third senator came out and joined the other 2, and he said, "By George, I have heard about these animals. They belong to one of my constituents. They're going to Florida for the winter, and I believe they're the first animals that ever migrated. This, gentlemen, is one of the most important occurrences in the animals of this August assemblage. I'm going to order a band and take them around and show them the city." So we went in and ordered the band and told the other senators, who put their heads out of the windows and smiled and waved at the animals. "What's a constituent?" asked Mrs. Wiggins. But none of the others could tell her, and to this day she has never found out. Pretty soon the band came, and they struck up, marching through Georgia, and went up the wide avenue toward the White House, and the animals marched behind. First came the senator in his high hat, and then Charles and Henrietta, and then Mrs. Wiggins with the mice sitting on her back, and then the two dogs, and then Freddy the pig, and then Hank with Alice and Emma on his back, and last came Jinx. They all walked in time to the music and held their heads up and pretended not to see any of the people that crowded the sidewalks, as everyone always does when he is in a parade. Beside them walked 20 policemen to keep the people back and to prevent them from pulling the tail feathers out of the ducks or chickens to keep as souvenirs. They went all over the city, and the senator showed them all of the fine buildings and the parks and the monuments, and at last they came to the White House. And there was the president out on the front porch, smiling and bowing to them, and as they filed past, he shook them each by a claw or a paw or a hoof. Even Eek and Quick and Eenie and Cousin Augustus overcame their timidity and put their tiny paws into the president's big hand. They were all very proud. And then they went on with the band playing a different tune every 10 minutes, and the people cheering and waving their handkerchiefs. And when they got to the edge of the city, the band stopped, and the senator made a speech, which began, "Friends and constituents, I am very sensible of the honor which you have done me today. To welcome a delegation of the home folks to the nation's capital is one of the few pleasures that cheer the burdened brow of those whose stern duty is to keep their shoulder always to the wheel of the ship of state. And that reminds me of a story of two Irishmen." He told the story, and the animals laughed politely, although they did not see anything really very funny about it, and that is why it is not written down here. Nor is the rest of the senator's speech written down, for the animals did not understand much of that either, and I am not at all sure that the senator did either. But I all agreed that it was a stirring speech. Then the senator said goodbye to the adventurers, and the band played Old Lang Syne, and the animals went on their way. "Well," said Mrs. Wiggins with a sigh as she dropped off to sleep that night, "we certainly did have a grand time, but I do wish that I knew what a constituent was." This is Grandma Carla, and I love you.